Now we'll look at the second arm of the supply chain ecosystem, which is the delivery services infrastructure. So here the contents are we should understand that the manufacturing, which is the supply chain primary goal, and the services are intertwined. In other words, there are several services which are needed in the manufacturing process. We are going to see that in the next slide, like logistics, like finance, like IT, and so on. So we cannot say their manufacturing and services are basically independent. They are intertwined. They have to work hand in hand. And here, since the delivery services infrastructure, we'll look at the developments in transportation in recent times, and also high performance trade logistics, their features, and some of the recent trends in logistics, and finally conclude this particular section. So here, let's look at the manufacturing and services are intertwined in a supply chain. So let's look at the supply chain. This is a manufacturing network which has suppliers. S stands for sourcing, M for manufacturing, D for distribution, and R for retail. And in this, what are the kinds of services that are needed for in this manufacturing? This one, in the pre-production, you conduct feasibility studies of the particular product. You require finance and venture capitalists. You require a lot of R&D in terms of doing the product design. You also have the market research for your product. So these are all the very vital services that are needed before you actually start manufacture of this particular product. And the second thing that you have while you are doing in the manufacturing, what are the kinds of inputs that you need? The quality control. How do you test whether your components are good, whether they are following the specifications, and they are going to be, when you assemble them, they are going to be modular, tight products, not loose coupled. And similarly, equipment leasing. Most of the equipment in the manufacturing is highly asset intensive, and hence the equipment is leased rather than they are purchased. And also the logistics, the MRO, maintenance, repair, and operations, and the logistics that is involved both in the manufacturing as well as the inbound logistics, that is from the suppliers to the manufacturers as well as from the manufacturers to the dealers and so on. So basically they are the services inputs into manufacturing. And services inputs into factory operations there are several. One is accounting, legal services, human resources, transport and communications, software, insurance, finance, real estate, security, cleaning, catering, and so on. So there are various kinds of services that are needed in the factory operations in this. And post production services. In other words, after your product is made, what are the services that you need? Advertising, distribution, outbound logistics, that is taking this to the product to the dealers, to the retailers, and sometimes to the customers. MRO is maintenance, repair, operations, which is basically service logistics. In case of a repair and a product recalls, you have to get the products back to the manufacturer. Customs and trade logistics, if you are doing international shipping, and client training. For the product, sometimes you may have to train your clients how to use it, how to use your product. So you can see that there are several services, and of course I didn't add here the obvious ones like the information technology, and there is the logistics, accounting, and other kinds of things. So here you can see that without the services, this one cannot function. And one thing which we have already seen is the financial supply chain. As the product moves forward, from supplier to manufacturer to retailers and customers, I told you the money needs to move backward. In other words, from the customer to the retailer, to the manufacturer, to the supplier. So you can see that financial supply chain is an important part in this. It provides you with the letter of credit. It provides you the credit to the customers to buy the products, and it is also provides the foreign exchange and other requirements in the global scenarios. So the point I'm making here is that although you are dealing with a manufacturing supply chain, there are several services which are of vital importance to interconnect these particular supply chains. And also there is one thing that is recently becoming very popular is the social networking among all the participants. Well, social networking is again another service that is provided through LinkedIn, Facebook, and other kinds of things. So there are inter-organizational networks which are being formed, which are more useful in terms of these services and others. Now, if you look at what are the developments in terms of the transportation. Transportation is one of the services in this. So the delivery infrastructure transforms economies. The internet, wireless, sensor networks facilitates greater visibility into and control of shipments through improved track and trace capabilities and real-time coordination. Now, any shipment, when it goes across countries, like if some shipment goes from China and comes to US, then it goes through several ports, several players, and it changes several hands, and it goes on several trucks. And the internet, the sensor networks like RFID, the wireless, all facilitate the visibility into this. This is called track and trace capabilities. If you have a container shipping, in case of container shipping, if your products are in a container, then you can trace the container and you can trace the ship where the container is and find out when your shipment is going to arrive to your production site. And also, if you are owner of all this, then you can do the real-time coordination. So several innovations in transportation systems have happened. For example, commercial jet aircraft to container shipping. In other words, for example, people like DHL or FedEx, they have their own aircraft for transportation of their mails. And there are Suez and Panama canals to facilitate trade facilitation. Now, for example, the Suez Canal and Panama Canal are the biggest innovations in the logistics paths, because they saved a lot of distance of shipping while transporting goods. And there is the trade facilitation, which is very common now in several ports, where the soft infrastructure is created in the ports to basically facilitate transfer of goods in a faster manner. And also in world-class supply chains, the movement of components, final products, information and funds are not discrete functions. It's not enough if you just transfer your components or the final products. Along with simultaneously, you should transfer the information, you should transfer the funds. So, but are governed by single integrated process. You should treat them, the transfer of product, goods, information and funds as an integrated product with a goal of tight management of deliveries, inventories and costs. So, the delivery infrastructure becomes a fundamental, this one that transforms the economies. So, for example, you can see in this particular diagram, there is the Suez and Panama canals, and here you have the Suez Canal. If the Suez Canal doesn't exist, you have to go via Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. Now, if you go via Cape of Good Hope, it's 1600 kilometers, and it is, if you go to via Suez Canal, it is 10,000 kilometers. So you are saving 6,000 kilometers because of the Suez Canal, and there is a lot of traffic that goes via Suez Canal. And similarly, if you go through the Panama Canal here, otherwise you have to go through South America, and it is 21,000 kilometers, whereas it's 8,000 kilometers if you go via the Panama Canal. So you save something like 13,000 kilometers because of the Panama Canal. And the Suez and Panama Canals have altered the global trade. Basically, they have become highly congested canals, and of course, along with these innovations there were Somali pirates in the Suez Canal who are trying to track the ships, and they basically create a lot of havoc in this particular region. So, but still, apart from that, the Suez and Panama canals have created a lot of traffic, and also they have altered the global trade in this. That is particularly between the Panama Canal to the US. It has created, and also the Suez Canal both to US and Europe. Now, if you look at the kind of transportation networks that were created in the globally, you can see from Hong Kong to Los Angeles, there are ships sailing direct, and you can see from Hong Kong to Houston and other parts, New York, in the United States, and you can see from Hong Kong to other places here, and similarly from Singapore via the Suez Canal to New York and others. So you can see how many routes have come in this particular thing. So the logistics trends and the impact of industrial real estate, as it is called, is enormous, and there are several shipping routes which have come during the globalization regime in the 90s and the year 2000, the first decade of year 2000. So, but this diagram is a nice one showing all the routes to the world. So, but what is high performance trade logistics? So, the quality and performance of logistics services differ markedly across countries. So, the logistics in India is different from in China, is different in the US, and different in Africa. And the trade competitiveness of these countries is basically depends on the logistics here. These variations in time cost stem from quality and cost of infrastructure services, policies, procedures, and institutions. So here, what does the variations in time and cost stem from? In other words, if you are, the idea of trade logistics is, if you are selling a container from a place, say in India to the US, or from a place in Africa to US, or from Singapore to US, what does it cost and how much time does it take? So there are variations in the time. It is not the same. I think it is, from some places it can take 30 days, from some other places it can take as low as 1 week. So these variations in time and cost stem from the quality and cost of the infrastructure services and the policies. Now, we are going to see that the hard infrastructure is only 25%. In other words, the port, the kind of infrastructure, and the equipment they have is only 25%, whereas 75% of this is in policies, procedures, and other things. That is how many, if you want to transport something across a port, there are 150 type of different documents to be signed and authorized before anything can happen. So this is the average of 150 documents which are need to be signed. For example, in Kazakhstan, it takes 93 days to export a 20-foot full container of cotton apparel, while in Sweden it takes only 6 days. And in Namibia, the cost of trade related transactions for a 20-foot full load container is, including land transport from the ocean vessel to the factory gate, amount to slightly more than $3,000, whereas in Sweden it is little more than $500. So you can see both the time and cost differences that occur, and that determines the competitiveness, trade competitiveness of a country. So I just want to bring in where the institutions and policies come into when you are talking of global trade. And what are the differences in the logistics performance? Differences in logistics performance are driven by the poor quality of physical infrastructure services such as road, rail, waterways, and port services, and their interfaces. Interfaces is, so if you have a truckload which is coming from the factory and it has to be loaded onto the ship. Now the truck has to go to the port, and from there it has to unload the whatever it has on the truck and then upload onto the ship. So those are the kinds of interfaces. Do you have services for transferring directly? The cranes, can it directly transfer from the truck to the ship? Then it is easy. But otherwise, if it has to put it on the ground and then upload it again, take it and so on, then it takes more time and more cost. And most inadequacies often are caused by policy and institutional constraints. Procedural red tape, poor enforcement of contracts and rules of engagement, delays in customs, ports and border crossings, pilferage in transit, and restrictive protocols on movement of cargo. Well, these are the differences which cause in the logistics performance. So you can see that there is what is called hard infrastructure, which is the infrastructure like roads, railways, the port, the cranes and all that. And also there are the soft infrastructure, which are the policy and institutional constraints when goods are crossing countries or sometimes the states. So, but the quality of delivery services has a major bearing on the firm's decisions about country to locate in. In other words, if you are a foreign, and if you want to go into low cost location, China, India or Philippines or whatever country, how are you going to make your decision to locate in? And or if you want to buy some components, are you going to go to China to buy it, or are you going to India to buy it, or some other country to buy from? And if you want to enter into a consumer market, in other words, you have some goods, refrigerators, you want to enter into a consumer market, which country are you going to enter? So then all this depends on the quality of delivery services. In other words, if you want to the road transport, the rail transport and the shipping, and also more importantly the rails regulations of the country where you are going to do it. So the delivery services has three components to it. One is the infrastructure, second one is the soft policies, regulations, and third one is companies which are doing the delivery. In other words, there must be logistics companies which are efficient, who can do the particular delivery. So that these are the three components that are needed. And high logistics costs and more particularly low levels of service are barriers to trade and foreign direct investment. In other words, there are countries now which are facing this particular problem, where there is the low labor productivity and bad infrastructure. These are basically cited as the reasons for not attracting FDI in some of these developing nations. Countries with higher overall logistics costs are more likely to miss the opportunities of FDI, because the point is the companies are in the market to make money. So if it costs much more to enter into one country than other, and then it has a lot of policy hurdles, then they may not be able to take the risk of entering those countries into this. And countries with efficient logistics infrastructure, such as Singapore and Hong Kong, were targets of MNCs for setting up facilities. We have seen in the last few decades that these two places, although they are cities, not countries, they have developed, they were targets for MNCs, because they have port infrastructure, they have air infrastructure, although they are islands, and people were able to transfer goods very efficiently, and they become transshipment hubs. So, how do you create a brand logistics service? If you want to create brand logistics services, then you have a brand logistics provider. Then that is resources, warehouses, fleet of vehicles, and containers. So, these are the resources that are needed to become a brand logistics provider. The other one is support of financial institutions for letter of credit, foreign exchange, and insurance and credits. See, you should understand that a logistics provider is in the business of transferring goods from one place to the other. It is one place is one manufacturer who is a supplier to another manufacturer who is an assembler. So, they are transferring goods. Now, in transferring the goods are highly valuable commodities there. So, when the supplier gives it to the logistics provider, he has a letter of credit from the manufacturer's bank. And so, the financial institutions are needed for otherwise the transport will not take place. And also, insurance against any of these things that can happen, and also they have to get a credit, because if you are selling an automobile or anything, people take loans to buy this. So, the financial institutions have to give credits to the customers. So, without this, the logistics support basically disappears. Skill development centers. Logistics is a commoditized activity. It is a routine activity and with easy steps, but it requires some skills. So, people have to develop, have training centers where these skills can be developed. For example, the warehouse management, the fleet maintenance, and so on. And educational institutions for research, because there are lots of new business models. You have to find out the optimal location of warehouses, which is an optimization problem. For each day, you have to do scheduling, truck services and maintenance, and freight space negotiation and allocation, and so on. So, basically, you have to, these are all daily problems that the logistics provider faces, and these are basically optimization problems. And there you should have education institution support for developing the software for all this. And of course, this is a very important thing, since you are dealing with multiple stakeholders. You have to have people with connections and also domain knowledge. There should be talent with the domain knowledge. In other words, what does domain knowledge mean? If you are a logistics provider for auto, if you are a logistics provider for, say, heavy equipment, transfer of boilers and all that, you should have tremendous amount of domain knowledge in terms of who are the big players. If you want something, how do you get? And I have connections with all these particular players. So, a brand logistics provider has to have resources, has to have support of financial institutions, skill development centers, and of course connections with educational institutions, and software for various kinds of things like warehouse location to truck service maintenance and so on. And also above all, its management should have talent with domain knowledge and connections. So what are some of the recent trends in logistics? Some of the recent trends in logistics are very interesting. One is there is the piracy in the seas. For example, I said before that the Suez and Panama canals have been the biggest innovations, and they have saved thousands of kilometers of shipping, and that has boosted the trade in this. But the pirates have seen these opportunities because it goes via seas. Many of the world's most powerful navies are involved in basically protecting their ships. For example, the oil that goes from various places, from Middle East to other places, that is Somali pirates. Basically, they take the ships, they take the people in the ship and the hostages and so on. So many of the world's most powerful navies like US, EU, India, Malaysia, Indonesia and South Africa, their navies actually, they follow the ships. This is the thing that this is like the army is following the ships to protect it from the piracy. The Japanese and South Koreans send warships to protect ships carrying cars. It is still cheaper and convenient. Then what people may ask is, why then go through the Panama and Suez canals? You can go via the South America or the Africa or the Cape of Good Hope. But still, it is still cheaper and convenient to pay higher insurance fees and take risk being attacked by the pirates than incur the extra cost of diverting vessels around the Cape of Good Hope. At least in case of Somali pirates, they find that instead of going via Cape of Good Hope and spend another thousands of kilometers on this, it is better to pay the higher insurance fees because of the risk of piracy. The insurance agents, insurance companies, they charge much more than they needed. So that's what happens in this particular thing. So, and then the other thing that's happening is the performance-based logistics. So it says never tell people how to do things, tell them what needs to be done and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. But what happens in most of the times in logistics is you say you deliver it at this particular time, you take this kind of truck and deliver it at by evening to that particular factory. You take this particular route and you go via these cities and so on. But on the other hand, this has the disadvantage of this. That is, supposing you take a company XYZ and it has contracted with ABC 3PL to provide a call center and fulfillment services. Right? You have a company XYZ. XYZ has contracted ABC, which is a logistics company. Under the transaction-based agreement, ABC 3PL gets paid more the worse the supply chain performs. How? In other words, it's supposed to, the 3PL or the logistics provider is supposed to make the company more profitable, the XYZ more profitable, but it doesn't happen that way. Supposing XYZ had forecasted too much that it is going to sell a particular product, then what happens is the 3PL will make more money by storing the excess inventory. So since it has forecasted, then it will store a lot of money in the warehouse, and once there is storage, because it is the storage is priced cost per day basis, so the 3PL will make money. And also what happens is if you cannot sell this particular product, it will become obsolete, and obsolete products have to be destroyed, and for destroying the obsolete product, it will make money. So the company XYZ, because of the forecasting error, has to not only loses the particular product it cannot sell, but it has to pay the 3PL for A for storing the excess inventory, and also for destroying the obsolete product, for disposing of the obsolete products, and so on. So, but if supposing XYZ has forecasted too little, that is, it wants to be careful and it doesn't want to carry too much inventory, or does not want to have the problem of obsolete products, then ABC gets the charge for expediting. So you are selling more, so you have to basically airship, or you have to have some other way of getting the product to the customers. So if ABC products are returned, they make even more money. So basically here is a condition where if you have a transaction based agreement, you just deliver, I will tell you what to do. Then it may happen that you will pay more money to the logistics. So nowadays what people are trying to do is performance based logistics. That is, under performance based contract, supplier is to assume a more proactive role in managing the customer's supply chain by bridging the supply and demand gap. So basically it looks at your shelves of the retailers and it's find out what is selling, and it will replace whatever is sold, and it will remove once it doesn't sell for more than 15 days. So the logistics provider is basically involved. He becomes a partner in the whole logistics business. The second thing that is happening is the logistics execution. Now, if you look at logistics, what is logistics? It's basically delivering a product at the right time, to the right place, to the right customer, at the right place, at the right time, at the right cost. So you have this execution. It is an execution, this one. That is, it's not planning anymore. You have to deliver the product. That means it is an execution based affair. So what will happen if something doesn't? Who is going to plan the whole thing? And what will happen if some truck fails and it cannot be delivered? Or what will happen if at a port there is a lot of delay? What will happen if you have to pay some fine somewhere? And so on. So more efficient back office processes and more responsive customer service via BPO. And there is one logistics company called Penske, and it works with a company called Genpact, which is a BPO. It has a BPO to improve the efficiency and customer service. So Penske is a US based logistics company, and Genpact manages the logistics services of Penske. Genpact workers in India and Mexico, and arrange for titles and registrations of the trucks leased by Penske. Now, Penske is a company. It doesn't own all the trucks. It may own some, but it doesn't own all the trucks, and it leases the trucks from Toyota, Ford, and other places. So the titles and registrations are all arranged by Genpact workers, and they check the customer credit status. Supposing there is an order from a particular customer to transfer, say 10 trucks have to transfer a particular material from somewhere in the United States in Minneapolis to someplace in Detroit, then they will check the customer credit status, arrange the necessary permits, that is, if it is an interstate transport, and if they get stuck at a way station, supposing the truck gets stuck at a way station for some reason, the truck driver would call the BPO staff. It won't call the original who would transmit the necessary documentation to the way station. And if money has to be paid, then the credit card is swiped by the BPO staff. And after the trip, drivers log into log would be shipped to a Genpack facility in Mexico, where mileage, tax, toll and fuel data are all punched into Penske computers and then processed in India. So, basically you can see that there is an outsourcing in addition to the outsourcing of the manufacturing logistics to a logistics company. Logistics company outsources to a BPO for the execution, and this is basically happening in the logistics industry to improve the execution capabilities of this. So, to conclude, logistics amount to 10 to 15% of every product produced. It is estimated to be more than US $2 trillion worldwide, and the quality of delivery services have a major bearing on the firm's decisions about the country to locate and also on the country's ability to attract FDI. So, it is very important that the quality of delivery services are improved. Hard infrastructure contributes only to 25% of logistics productivity, and other 75% comes from soft infrastructure such as trade facilitation, ISD based execution and so on. So, we have dealt with some of these issues here, and that is the delivery service infrastructure and execution becomes an important part of the supply chain here. Actually, now we are going to look at the institutions, that is another element in the ecosystem and their influence on the supply chain. Now, here what are the influence of the institutions and supply chains? As we have seen in earlier lectures, in global supply chains, the inter-country entry and exit through the ports and airports need to be managed to minimize lead times and inventory. Well, as we are going to see in the next lecture, the performance of the supply chain is in terms of the cost, lead times, flexibility, quality and so on. So, the lead times are the total times, and when in the global supply chain, the time that is spent at the ports or airports is an important measure, because it contributes to the lead time and also to the inventory. Inventory means it increases the cost. So, that is one of the issues here. So, what are the important parameters for companies to register superior performance? One is soft infrastructure. Everybody, as I have been emphasizing in my previous lectures also, everybody talks of hard infrastructure like ports, cranes, warehouses and so on. There is soft infrastructure like trade facilitation and the internet clearances and email, e-retailing. These are all the soft infrastructures which basically improve the productivity. And customs duties and clearances, free trade agreements and foreign direct investment restrictions. Of course, the customs duties are what you pay when you import, and also there is a clearance that is needed at the ports whether you can import that particular item or not, and that can create time problems and so on. The free trade agreements are between countries. There can be regionals, there can be global, and it can be between two countries. So, there is the NAFTA, which is a North Indian Free Trade Agreement, which is between Canada, United States and Mexico, and there is the AFTA, which is between the countries in South Asia, and there are other agreements between countries like India and Singapore, India and Thailand and so on. So, basically these countries, there are free trade agreements of this, and there are FDI restrictions which are typically followed. A company cannot just enter any country and start investing or manufacturing and selling. It has to take the permission of the government. For example, in India, there are restrictions on multi-brand retailing. People can enter for single brand retailing. They can enter to do dealerships, but they cannot do multi-brand retailing in this. So, and this is possible in some industries, in some verticals. It may not be possible in some other countries. It all depends on the country, the local environment, and so on. But these are the rules made by the government, and they need to be strictly followed. The business friendliness, enabling attitude, and economic diplomacy, or another country, is the country business friendly. In other words, if there are any problems associated with the company, with the judiciary, the legal processes, are they friendly to the foreign countries? And also the enabling attitude. In other words, if you are a foreign this one, what is the attitude that the society has, the government has towards that company? And there is the economic diplomacy is between countries, or between company and countries, where the people, as a part of their foreign diplomacy, or the country to country diplomacy, the economic diplomacy is in terms of the foreign investments, or the human resource adjustments between countries in terms of the visas for employment of the people and from one country to the other. There are also other people like labor unions, which are becoming important. This one, they can go on strike, or they can demand higher pays. Industry associations, of course, there are lots of associations, automobile associations, industry chambers, and other communities which are important. So, they are important parameters for companies under the institutions. So, favorable institution environment reduces transaction costs. Supposing, what is favorable institution environment? Supposing whenever you enter, there is a cost involved in terms of not only taxes, but also in terms of checkings. You know, if there is a checking at the border, then it takes time, or also time, but both the delays in the inventory and so on. So, basically, the institution environment which is favorable, it will reduce the cost. If you have unfavorable institutional environment, then to make it favorable, there could be some transaction costs associated in terms of the coordination and all that. So, the institutions play a very global part in global supply chains. So, it is very important, one has to take into account in terms of this one. So, there is companies, there people frequent talk of economic integration. What is economic integration? Two countries cooperate so that there are no legal barriers for the circulation of goods, capitals, and persons. So, these are basically in a country like United States or in India, there are no legal barriers for circulation of goods and capitals across state. And at the same time, there are negligible economic and social barriers like transportation costs, intermediation costs, and social costs. But when you are crossing countries, these legal barriers as well as economic social barriers were there. So, if you want to economic integration like European Union, then these barriers are taken away, and you can have free transport of goods, capital, and persons from and at the same time you can have economic and not much of economic and social barriers. You know, if you look at the cooperation between countries over the years, there were 16 FTAs, free trade agreements, in 1989, and they have increased to 171 in 2009. So, basically, there is an increase in terms of the agreements which are between countries. Why are these agreements are increasing? That's because, you know, people realize that there is speciality involved in countries. Suppose if a country has natural resources like oil in the Middle East, then you don't have oil, so you have to import. So, you need to basically have an agreement for import of oil between the Middle East and your country. And similarly, the story that if you have some human resources that you have and the other country does not have, so there to transfer human resources from one country to another, then you require the free trade agreements. So basically the issue is no country has everything that is needed for the country's people. So you have to depend on other countries, and now the trend is to depend to cooperate and make the lives of people more enjoyable. So for that country, there are basically free trade agreements. Of course, the big question is, which country do you choose? What is the free trade agreement? For what vertical? That all depends on the policy, and also the study then depends on the geography of the country and so on. So, but suffice it to say that there is a definitely a move or a trend towards more cooperation among countries within the world. So, I made this point yesterday when I was talking about the delivery mechanisms, is that when you are trading across the borders, only 25% of time is taken to import, and is determined by the hard infrastructure. So there is what is called hard infrastructure, that is port and terminal handling. There is the inland transport and customs inspection and pre-arrival documents. If you look at, this is a World Bank document of 2006, the port and terminal handling, it takes 12% of time. Inland transport is 13%. So total is 25% is for the hard infrastructure, like the ports, the cranes, the trucks and so on. Whereas the customs inspection takes 16% of the time, and pre-arrival documents takes 59% of the time. So it takes 75% of time for the soft infrastructure. This is where, if you follow the trade facilitation and also get the pre-arrival documents, simplify the procedures and the signatures that are, number of signatures that are needed for pre-arrival documents, then you will save a lot of time. And similar is true with the customs and inspection. So there are ways in which you can use modern technologies like sensor networks, RFID tags and all that to basically go to the factory, seal it there when they are loading into the container, and once it is electronically sealed, you need not have to inspect again at the customs, and you can load it directly onto the to the ship. So that's minimizing the customs inspection times and so on. But still, it requires a lot of trust and faith between the companies and the country officials to basically reduce this 75%. And if you look at the electronic trade documents, for example, if you take if the business is within the same country, for example, you have a seller and you have a buyer, and there is a domestic carrier, and it is going from one place to the other, and the payments for the documents could be just one. That is, the bank could be the same for both the buyer and seller located in the same country or in the same state, and also when the truck is moving, all that the documents that are needed could be a single document. But whereas if the truck is moving globally, then you have an exporter, exporter's bank, customs officials, freight forwarder, domestic carriers, and then international carrier like shipping, and then it has to go to a broker, then domestic carriers on the other side, bank on the other side, customs on the other side, and goes to the importers. So on the average about 180 documents are needed and they have to be transacted between all these people, which amounts to about 12 to 20 players who are involved in all this, including the exporters, the customs, the banks, the forwarders, and the carriers, both domestic and international, and the brokers. So this is the kind of thing that basically makes the global trade a cumbersome exercise. That's where 75% of the time is taken for getting the document clearance rather than moving the materials and so on. So it becomes very important that one should look at this the trade facilitation and to minimize the documents. Minimizing documents does not mean that you allow them free, but you have to basically streamline the trade processes so that things are done properly as well as simply and efficiently. So we have efficient global logistics is more than brick and mortar infrastructure. So 7% of the world trade is trade logistics. 7% of world trade is logistics cost. That's huge. You can see that this one. Trade logistics costs are important as tariffs. You know, people, they worry about the tariffs, but the logistics costs also is important. Each day saved is equivalent to 0.5% of tariff. Each additional day in transport reduces probability US sources from that country by 1 to 1.5%. That is basically huge, this one. Most developing nations expand their hard infrastructure, airports, highways, ports, etc., overlook the other network components such as efficient customs clearance and quality trucking services and so on. So it all becomes that the trade logistics has to be made more efficient. So you have two issues here. One is the balance between brick and mortar facilities and policies and regulations and their enforcement. So the processing times and reduction on inventory times which these people have. So do you want to have the more brick and mortar facilities and policies, regulations and their enforcement results in consistent processing times and reduction of inventory levels and so on. So it's important to notice that the efficient global logistics is more than brick and mortar infrastructure, and the hard and soft infrastructure we are mentioning, we need to be taken into account. So what are the visible barriers to trade? They are basically import quotas, a very transparent means of limiting the quantity of product that can be imported into the country. You say you can import 1,000 cars in any year, or you can import 10,000 cars in any year, or 1 lakh laptops in any year and something. Some products have tariff rate quotas where if you import say 1,000, then it is free, and 1,000 to 10,000, then you have to pay some 10% estate duty, and if it is more than 10,000 to 20,000, you pay some other duty and so on. Textile, food and steel are some of the products that have quota restrictions. That's because there is the local consumption. Because of the local consumption, if people are given an opportunity, they may want to trade outside. That's because it's more advantageous or more to trade from with other countries than locally and so on. So, and voluntary export restrictions. What happens is quota on trade is imposed by exporting country at the request of the importing country, the government. This is between the countries. Instead of always saying import quotas, you can say I won't import. A country can say I should not import more than 10,000 pieces. You should not import more than 1,000 cars because it will affect the local companies. So basically these kind of voluntary export restrictions are given in industries like cement, steel and so on. Invisible barriers. There are lots of invisible barriers which are not apparent, and the countries won't say that, but they are there, and that is the government. Governments are the largest purchasers of goods and favor only domestic producers. So all the indirect goods purchases like paper, the computers, the office equipment and so on, that's a huge expenditure for the government, and they are purchased only from domestic purchases. That's basically an invisible barrier to trade. That is, they are basically favoring the domestic companies. Local content requirements, product standards, import licenses are subjective. You say local content, for example, is people say country of origin or local content. Difficult to identify where the products are made when the production process causes several bodies. You say it is made in India, you say it is made in China, it is made in Taiwan and so on, but everything has crossed several countries and has crossed the hands of several companies. So, the country of origin is that country where article is mined, grown and produced or manufactured. But if the production process took place in different countries, country of origin is where goods underwent substantial transformation. So, then the subjective thing is what is substantial transformation. For one example is jeans were shipped to Mexico and bulked in an oven and returned to USA. Since bulking was done to fix the dye, the court ruled that jeans went through a substantial transformation. So, if dyeing is substantial transformation, so it is. So, the country of origin in this particular case of jeans becomes Mexico. So, depending on the country origin, the import duties and others change. So, there are lots of invisible barriers to trade that happens. So, in other words, if you look at what is happening, the governments play a significant role in the functioning of the supply chain. Not only the import duties, not only the voluntary quotas, not only providing the atmosphere to this one business friendliness atmosphere to the companies to come in and survive. So it becomes they play a very significant role in this, and they can basically play a proactive role in making things simpler and making the business, making the environment more business friendly and so on. So, from liberation to protectionism, from low customs duty to quotas, from no tax to service tax, there are a multitude of factors that can influence the company finances. Now, after all, one should remember that everybody is in a business to make money, and what happens if the entering a particular country means making losses, then no company will enter into that particular country. So, it's both in the interest of the countries and the company that the institutions play a positive role, which benefits both the country as well as the company. So, we have completed this, the four factors, that is the supply chains, the resources, the delivery mechanisms and the institutions, and their role in making in the functioning of the supply chain.